What if your organs don't just perform functions? What if they actually participate in your experience? For thousands of years, traditional Chinese medicine has described emotional associations with organs. Grief with the lungs, anger with the liver, fear with the kidneys, overthinking with the spleen, joy and shock with the heart, right? Modern medicine doesn't phrase it that way, but here's the interesting part. Modern neuroscience is starting to describe similar connections just in a different language. So, today in this episode, we're going to actually explore this carefully, not in a mystical way, not symbolically, but physiologically. So, in traditional Chinese medicine, organs are not just physical tissues within our body. They're actually considered energetic systems that are connected to emotional patterns. So, example, the lungs are associated with grief, the kidneys with fear, the liver with frustration or anger, the spleen with rumination, right? The heart, joy and shock. Now, is this saying that the emotions live inside of your organs? Maybe not necessarily, but it is saying that this emotional stress pattern, that emotion, is influencing those organ systems more predictably, right? Ancient physicians didn't have MRIs. They had observation, and they started noticing patterns within their patients. And when someone experienced prolonged grief, they found that respiratory issues followed. When someone lived in chronic fear, adrenal and kidney stress patterns came up, right? So they mapped these pattern correlations. And this is what traditional Chinese medicine really is. It's about finding these patterns, right? It's like a pattern medicine. So let's bridge this into more of this science understanding. We know from psychoneuroimmunology that emotional stress changes the physiology of your body, right? Chronic stress affects immune function, inflammation pathways, hormone signaling, gut motility, heart rate variability. We also know about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve connects the brain to the heart, to the lungs, to the digestive organs, right? It carries emotional tone into the body, and this is called interoception, your brain's perception of internal organ states. Research has actually shown that emotional experiences activate organ systems through the autonomic nervous system pathways, right? And that autonomic nervous system is the nervous system that we don't really have to think about, right? It's the one that does the things for our body that we don't have to consciously tell our body to do, right? Like breathing. So when someone feels grief, it's not an abstract thing for the body. It actually changes respiratory rates. It actually creates tension in the chest, and it can shift cortisol. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the lungs hold the grief, literally. I would argue maybe that is the case, but it does at least mean that grief consistently impacts the lung-related physiology, right? Over time, this repeated activation becomes pattern. And this pattern can feel like the organ is holding something. And if it holds it long enough, that can turn into things that could be reflected in modern medicine as a dis-ease in the body, right? But it's really this nervous system imprinting that's being expressed through that organ system. And that's really the bridge. This is the bridge. This is the bridge to how we heal, right? This is ancient observation. Now we're pairing it with this modern understanding. So I've worked with a woman who was experiencing deep loss. She had been through 2 miscarriages. And shortly afterward, actually developed some chest tightness or respiratory issues. This was not because her lungs were emotional containers. It's actually because the grief activates the breath. The breath will constrict under sorrow. And if grief is prolonged or unprocessed, then this respiratory pattern can become deeper. And we worked on increasing this emotional processing and nervous system regulation to help change the breathing, to reduce the tension. Not because, we treated the lungs directly, but because we addressed the actual underlying emotional load that was impacting the system. So women, another example would be women under chronic fear or chronic urgency. A lot of them often show thyroid or adrenal dysregulation patterns. This is a pattern that I've dealt with, right? And it's not because that fear lives in the thyroid. It's actually because fear activates metabolic signaling pathways and the body has to adapt. And this adaptation becomes a pattern. And that's what people describe as organs holding this emotion or this state. In my own life, there's been seasons where, uncertainty has triggered different physical responses, tightness, digestive changes, energy fluctuations. And when you look at it purely physically, it was totally confusing. Why is this happening? There's no explanation. But when you look through the lens of nervous system imprinting, the emotions, the subconscious beliefs, all of that starts to make sense and it starts to create this bigger picture. And it wasn't that the body is malfunctioning. My body is adapting. Our bodies adapt. Our bodies adapt to what helps increase safety for our survival, right? But once you realize that, that can be the first layer to unfolding truly these patterns that we have that have built up over time. And when I start to see my own things through this lens, it can really reshape, and it has reshaped, how I see the symptoms and then how I also support clients, right, and their healing journey as well. So what ancient medicine observed thousands of years ago, modern science is mapping now in a different language. Emotional stress changes physiology. And that's not a philosophy, right? That's biology. That's how our system works. That's how our body works. And so the nervous system communicates with every major organ system through this neural and hormonal signaling. So when emotional stress is repeated or reminds the subconscious of a situation or scenario that happened in the past, it can repeat those signals. It repeats those symptoms, right? And then this repetition can create this pattern in our life where we find that certain symptoms come back at certain times of the year, or certain symptoms come back after certain situations have happened in our life. So when we say that organs hold emotion, what we're really describing is that this pattern physiological response to repeated emotional states is occurring. And this is basically trauma stored in the body, right? So the body will adapt because it's trying to protect you. And this adaptation over time starts to feel like a dis-ease that arises in the body. So it's not mystical. It's not a mystical thing. It's really, truly intelligence. It's the intelligence of our bodies and how they work. So the great part is that when you can start to understand the pattern, you can actually stop fighting the organ and the system and actually look at what is the real, true root that is below the surface of what's creating these symptoms within the body. So instead of asking what organ is broken, a good question to ask would be, what pattern has been repeatedly activating this system? What happens in my life before this symptom shows up? What has happened, anytime before this symptom has arisen? And so when you start to ask that question, you can start to change how you see the situation, and you can start to develop this healing response, because now you're not fighting your body, right? You're not, oh, my body's doing this, my body's doing that. Now you can be like, okay, I understand why this is happening. And when you start to have that understanding, that can create safety within the body to help create this regulation and healing that needs to occur. So when I've worked with clients or with myself, I don't treat organs, right? We're exploring the patterns. We look at situations that have happened. We look at, how the subconscious mind is interpreting, trauma that has happened. We look at the emotional load. We look at nervous system. We look at these subconscious imprints that are created from experiences that have happened. And when you start to shift those, the physiology, the symptoms will follow, right? Not in a crazy way, but like often subtly and gradually, which is very cool. So I want you to remember, if this really starts to expand your understanding, you really want to look deeper at that subconscious imprints that could be playing out and creating this scenario within your body, these symptoms within your body, right? So if you feel like you want to go deeper in this, definitely subscribe here, because when you do, healing becomes this less mysterious thing, and we can understand the pattern beneath the symptom. Then more people will understand how their emotions and experiences in their lives actually interact with their biology. And there becomes less fear. There becomes less self-blame. And we start to partner with our body and how it's designed to heal. And so if we can send that out into, the world, that ripple really matters, because it will change the way and the access to, supports that we have. And so today, what I want you to do before you close out here is just notice what your body might be expressing. If you've had a symptom arise or something come up, just notice why that may have happened, what might have happened prior to that, right? But not seeing it as a malfunction, see it as an adaptation.